Okay. Uh, can we consult with Lucy? Should we just get started? Because it's 6:05 now,
I'm happy to get started if you
and
are,
people
Bob.
have started drinking. So
Yep, I think that's
we've been too long. So do you want to go to the us taking up the screen?
yeah, I think that's us. We'll kick off. I'll just say it again, folks, just as Bob mentioned at the start of the conversation. This event is getting recorded. So if you feel more comfortable turning off your video feed, then by all means. But it's just getting used, obviously, for kind of further advancement of the man himself's book launch. So I guess.
Also, don't say about the chat. People want to the chat thing where they
Oh
can
yes,
put
of course.
questions in.
Yep. There's a chat. There's a chat box at the side or at the bottom. So I will be taking questions at the end. So get your thinking caps on, thinking deerstalkers on. See, I've
And
tried to keep it
Anne
up.
Landman has messaged to say this is best enjoyed on speaker view. So
Absolutely.
so I guess everybody can adjust their own things. But
Yeah, definitely.
okay, so they
But
can have
yes,
this. I'll just have to
get
start.
your questions.
Well, that's up
Get
to
your
them then.
questions ready. Get them
Okay,
prepared.
I will.
Uh,
Let's go then. Jonathan, you do this intro you've been working on for the past
all
3 weeks.
day, all day.
Speaking up, please.
Bit louder.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay now? Is that better?
Better, yeah. Get your mic in your gob.
Okie doke, folks. Listen, thank you very much for arriving. Thank you very much for being a part of this. I'll kick off with a massive congratulations, obviously, to Bob on publication day. As I'm sure you'll all join me, raising a glass of whatever, round of applause, virtual round of applause.
Water. So
Absolutely.
far.
Fantastic. Congratulations, Bob.
See?
I have prepared an immaculate introduction here, which I'm going to read from, actually. And then we'll get into the nitty gritty of it, because I'm sure we're all amongst friends here, and it's any and all criticisms can be reserved for the end.
Well.
So Robert J. Harris was born in Dundee and studied at the University of St Andrews, where he graduated with a first-class honours degree in Latin. He's the designer of the best-selling fantasy board game Talisman, and has written numerous books, including Leonardo and the Death Machine, Will Shakespeare and the Pirate's Fire, and the popular World Goes Loki children's series. For his new novel, A Study in Crimson, I've got my copy, I hope you do, he turns his hand to the world's greatest detective, Sherlock Holmes, who's hot on the heels of a killer stalking the wartime streets of London, murdering women on the exact dates of the infamous Jack the Ripper killings. And it would be remiss of me not to mention that a deal has been struck with Pegasus Books in the US to publish A Study in Crimson. So it's a bit of a double celebration.
Yeah, that just happened today. So.
Absolutely. So congratulations again. Another round of applause. I think it's going to be one of those launches, Bob. I think our hands are going to be sore by the end of it. Either that, or we're all going to be drunk if we keep charging our glasses. Works for me.
I'll give me a slight drink. Okay, I've got Debbie's wine. I'll just swap it.
Lovely, wonderful. But yes, fantastic. Congratulations. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this. Delighted to see you, and delighted to see so many people here. I obviously want to share in this this wonderful moment. Again, guys, if you have any questions, please just pop them into the chat. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of it. I'll kick off with one question. Then we're going to have a couple of brief readings over the course of the event. I've got a very, very quick question that I want to ask Bob before we go into the first one. And the first one is, Sherlock Holmes, are you mad? Why are you doing such a fantastic job in coming and even going anywhere near a property like Sherlock Holmes and doing such a good job? What possessed you? What could have possessed you to do something like this, to write this book?
It was the devil. No.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for
that. Well, as you failed to mention so far, I've been writing a series of young Arthur Conan Doyle stories, the Arthur Conan Doyle mysteries. I've had this idea quite a while back to do Sherlock Holmes style mysteries for younger readers, featuring the teenage adventures of Arthur Conan Doyle in Victorian Edinburgh. So I've written 3 of these, which, and I'll say anybody who enjoys a good mystery, we've got lots of adult fans as well, so they're really good mysteries.
Absolutely.
So constructing these mysteries for the young Conan Doyle, which was in the fiction of it, I'm going to inspire him to write Sherlock Holmes novels. I was constructing what I thought were really good mysteries, and they've been reviewed very well. The mysteries are, as well as the characters have been good fun, they're really very good mysteries. So it crossed my mind, of course, they'd be worthy of Sherlock Holmes, and maybe I could write a Sherlock Holmes novel at some time. But the problem with that being that, and essentially somewhat alluded to, there are zillions of Sherlock Holmes novels out there of, let's say, variable quality. Uh, and
Very diplomatic of you, Bob. Very
yes,
diplomatic.
I think so. As well as all the TV and so I kind of shelved that idea, and then but then an idea came to me that was something different that hadn't been done, which was for years our whole family, us and our three sons, have enjoyed those old black and white Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes films. I of course have the box set, which I got to use back as a DVD. Now, the first two, Hound of Baskervilles and The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, are based on original things, the Conan Doyle novel Baskervilles and the Gillette play Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which of course is set in Victorian times. And it was 20th century Fox made films of those and cast Rathbone and Bruce as Holmes and Watson, which is a decisive thing. And then they decided not to do any more, but in the meantime, Rathbone and Bruce are now starring in a long-running and very popular radio series of Sherlock Holmes. And so they're very well established as the characters. So when Universal Pictures came along, I wanted to kind of take up the baton on the Sherlock Holmes films. They had this great wheeze of an idea. They would update it, and they would put Sherlock Holmes in the modern day, in 1942, in wartime London. And this was actually agreed by the Doyle estate, so it's not like a monstrous thing to do. The Doyle family agreed this would be a really good way to refresh the character for a modern, as it was then, audience. They started that with Sherlock Holmes and the Voice of Terror in 1942, in which he had to break up a Nazi sabotage ring. And the first few films were very much involved the war. They were like propaganda. He's fighting Nazi spies and things. Then people kind of got tired of that, so they went to kind of more standardized Sherlock Holmes mysteries, but all still set in 1940s. Because I grew up watching these, anyway, my generation did. They're still running on the Turner Classic Movies channel here. You can see them anytime on there. And especially my picture of Inspector Gerard came from, Lestrade came from that. Lestrade, of a beefy bloke in a Macintosh and a bowler hat, not the Weasley man he is in the books. So, and subconsciously, the whole Sherlock Holmes thing was Rathbone and all that. Even I saw the Peter Cushing TV series and others.
Yep.
And so we were showing these to our kids, and they loved them too, loved the whole atmosphere of the whole thing. And suddenly out of the blue, because this is where do you get your ideas from? They just come. I had the notion, well, nobody's ever thought to do that. This is actually a very well-established version of Sherlock Holmes. Yep. There are 12 of these 1940s set films with pictures. They're all of them pretty good, and some are just outstanding. So I thought, well, that's a great thing to do with Sherlock Holmes that nobody's ever thought to do. To take that version of Sherlock Holmes, which is one that's not invented by me, but is a well-established portrayal, and write a novel which actually takes that Sherlock Holmes in wartime London, but there's a new story, not connected to the films directly, although taking little bits from them and paying tribute to them. And that would open up all kinds of doors and possibilities for stories. So that was the art. So I had the basic idea first of all, and I took that to my publisher. I did a printed sheet with picture of Rathbone and the whole blog about it, and just the gist of a plot. And he said, "This is great. Yes, we want to do this." So I interrupted writing my Richard Hannay books for them to do this. And then the plot that came was I was leafing through in the bathroom, as one does. I had this book of The World of Sherlock Holmes, which is one of these Sherlockian books, which just plays the game of assuming that he's a real person and lived in real history. Like, well, who would he have met? Where would he have been? And all that stuff. So that there was a chapter on Jack the Ripper, and I suddenly thought, oh, that'd be great. And obviously, it can't be Jack the Ripper because it's 1942. But somebody imitating the crimes of Jack the Ripper would be a really neat thing to do, because instead of being shrouded in the Victorian fog, he's actually shrouded in the darkness of the blackout which is enveloped in London because of the danger of the German air raids. So you've got a really nice creepy environment for a criminal to operate in, and a legendary villain reincarnated, so to speak, for Holmes to face. Of course, Holmes faced Sherlock Holmes in movies and stories before, but not quite like this. So I was really excited by it. My publishers were really keen on it, and so off we went, and now here it is.
Here we are.
It's a real book now. So now, so I'll hand over to you now, Jonathan.
Thank you. That you summed it up much better than I could ever hope to. But that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point. Shall we have a reading then? Shall we have a quick read? I think you've teased us enough, Bob.
I have.
What are you going to read from us?
What
are you going to read for us from?
A couple of murders in, The killer, who calls himself Crimson Jack, sends a taunting little poem to the police, teasing them with his identity and such like. So, so we have this scene where Lestrade has brought this note to Baker Street for Holmes to look it over and analyse it. And they're talking about this, what clues they can find in it. And I love Lestrade in those films, like played by Dennis Hopper. So this is Lestrade, this sort of beefy cop. And so I'll try and get the voices right to some extent. Lestrade leaned forward, the chair creaking beneath his shifting weight. I believe you gentlemen are missing the biggest clue of the lot, he said. The Bloiter tells us in plain English that his family business is killing women. That can only mean he comes from a line of murderers, or there's at least one other killer in the family. Yes, go on, Holmes encouraged. Lestrade's voice grew husky with dramatic import of what he was about to say. Suppose he's telling us that he's a blood relative of the original Jack the Ripper. That is an intriguing suggestion, Lestrade, Holmes commented approvingly. Most intriguing, and yet hardly very helpful, I reminded them both. We can scarcely follow up this hint that the true identity of Jack the Ripper has remained a secret for decades. There's, of course, Watson telling the story as usual. Holmes assumed a wounded air. You do me a disservice, Watson. Of course I know the true identity of Jack the Ripper. Holmes had surprised us many times over the years, but never before, I believe, had we both turned on him with such utter blank astonishment. Lestrade's jaw went slack. Mr. Holmes, are you seriously telling us that you've solved the Ripper murders? Certainly, said Holmes with complete aplomb. You will recall, Watson, that in the April of 1931, I was suffering from a debilitating bout of ennui brought on by a lack of crime to provide me with the intellectual stimulation which is vital to my well-being, as much so as the very air. I can recall a number of such occasions, I admitted somewhat stiffly, though I confess I cannot assign dates to them all. Holmes pressed his long fingers together. Well, on that particular occasion, rather than resorting to those means of recreation of which you so heartily disapprove, I decided to apply myself to that long unsolved mystery. Rising to his feet, he stepped over to one of his bookshelves and lifted down a large folder tied shut with a red ribbon. Returning to his chair, he deposited it on the table in our midst. This folder, he explained, contains all of the relevant documents I was able to assemble. Newspaper reports, police records, witness statements, and all other materials with a bearing on the Whitechapel murders of 1988. Lestrade uttered an incredulous bleat. And you solved the case? Of course, Holmes affirmed, with no trace of modesty. My own thoughts were reeling. Has it not occurred to you, Holmes, to make public your discovery? To what end? Holmes seemed genuinely puzzled at the notion of courting publicity with this breakthrough. The murder is long beyond the reach of human justice, and there's no purpose to be served in causing distress to his surviving family. Really, Holmes, I pressed him, I appreciate your point, but surely in a matter like this, of such huge and enduring public interest, Holmes looked pained. You know, Watson, I'm beginning to suspect that what really irks you is that I did not turn all of this over to you, he tapped the bulging folder, so you could weave it into one of those overly romanticized tales your publishers are so fond of. Really, Holmes, I retorted, I will not grant so unworthy suggestion even the dignity of a denial. And yes.
Lovely.
So yeah, so that thank you. It's applause.
The winner. Absolutely.
And I'd say about that, the point that is that at the heart of a good Sherlock Holmes story, the relationship between Holmes and Watson has got to be lively. You know, they have these little spats, and Conan Doyle does that really well. And Holmes' vanity is quite a big part of those things. So the second reading will have a bit follow on to that later. But yes, Holmes has indeed solved the original Ripper killings. So I had to research those, obviously, because they're being imitated, as well as come up with a solution to that, which you'll find. Although the person he named as Jack the Ripper is a fictional name, but the note at the end will tell you who the real suspect is, that many of the facts have been taken from to fill that out. So there is a real suspect. It's not that I'm saying that guy's the killer. I've no dog in this race. I don't really mind. But somebody who fitted the bill quite well for my purposes in the book, because every year there's a new Jack the Ripper revelation comes out. So I'm not getting into that. But yes, Holmes does solve that. He's solved it already, and next chapter explains the solution to it.
Well, I was going to ask actually. I mean, you know, you take a figure like Jack the Ripper, and with everything that goes on, and with all the literature that surrounds this figure, whether it was a real figure, whether it was an amalgamation of people, obviously you've done your research, Bob, in terms of all of that. There's a wonderful there's that sort of wonderful dichotomy between this figure of Jack the Ripper being this embodiment of evil, like it's the Alan Moore comic, isn't it? From Hell. That's that really kind of taps into that sort of primal fear of a character like Jack the Ripper. And then you've got someone like Sherlock Holmes, who is the complete antithesis to that. No matter what the incarnation is, it's this kind of this great bastion of good. Obviously flawed in many ways. But was that something that how did that play out for you when you're writing it, when you've got these kind of two very, 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 very opposite characters, I suppose, and you're kind of smashing them together? How did that come about?
Well, one of my favourite Sherlock Holmes film outside of Basil Rathbone films is Murder by Decree, where Christopher Plummer plays Sherlock Holmes with James Mason as a lugubrious Watson, and they're tracking down Jack the Ripper in 1888. And it's a really good film, really creepy, and I like the humanity of Christopher Plummer's Sherlock Holmes. So I was aware that once again the Holmes versus Ripper is almost a standard kind of thing people set up. They've been done in a couple of films and a few books and such like. And I think it has that element. What's in this is, are you dealing with a lunatic here? We're dealing with a madman who just murdered because he's insane. And if he's just insane, is it possible to track him down using Holmes' methods of reason and logic? I mean, is he operating outside that kind of logical framework, in which case he's going to be so elusive that he can't be caught. So you have to find out by reading the book whether how that plays out. So of course a lot of it is what is actually going on here, who's doing this and why. And of course part of the fun of the book was because there are various theories of who Jack the Ripper was, and in this book there's all sorts of theories come out about what's going on with Crimson Jack, our current killer. Some of them come from journalists. Some at one point Watson's trapped in a taxi with a London cabbie who's got about a dozen different theories of what's going on, including voodoo, suspended animation, which Watson is forced to listen to in his cab ride. So it was a good fun thing to take a lot that notion of how the kind of mythic ideas that swirl about the character Jack the Ripper and play around with that as we work towards the solution that Holmes will find in this book.
And everyone else will find out once they buy it.
Read it, yeah. To the end, yes.
There's always a catch.
No spoilers. No
spoilers. There's always a catch. Exactly. Yeah. In terms of obviously I follow you on social media, as I'm sure everyone does, and if you don't, get on it. In the lead up to this, in the lead up to this, in the lead up to publication, lead up to today, you've been going through the actors and the stars and the characters and the casting throughout those Universal pictures. Was that something when you're writing, or when you were writing this? I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? This is the thing with kind of fictional characters, and someone like Sherlock Holmes, who's had so many physical iterations over the years, not just in a kind of literary field, but it continues to happen. We were watching last night on Netflix Enola Holmes, where Henry Cavill plays the great detective. Not very well, and I noticed
he doesn't really look like Sherlock Holmes.
No, he doesn't. And apparently there's been quite a bit of outrage that he's too nice, quote unquote, to be Sherlock Holmes. Take from that what you will, but I don't know. It's one of those things. I suppose we could be. That's a whole other evening's discussion. My question is, when you're setting your Sherlock Holmes novel like this within a universe that's already established as having actors who are there, how much does that influence you when you're writing them? Are you hearing Basil Rathbone's voice when you're writing the dialogue of it? Is that very much at the forefront of it? And not just him, obviously, the whole cast.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's only 4 characters in the book who are actually in the films as feature. There's Holmes, Watson, Dennis Hoyes as Lestrade, and Mary Gordon as Mrs. Hudson, who started Hudson is Scottish. He's quite in the press in Scotland as Hollywood's first Scottish star. You know? And so they are in the book as they are in the films. And of course, I'm hearing Basil Rathbone, and I tried to go over the intellectual and physical vigor that Rathbone invests into Sherlock Holmes. I think works really, really well. And beyond that, actually, well, one of the other Sherlock Holmes versus Jack Nichol's film, A Study in Terror, a Hammer film, with John Neville as Sherlock Holmes, features Mycroft Holmes, who is there from the government to press Sherlock to solve these killings. He's played by Robert Morley. So originally, Robert Morley to me just seemed to be perfect for Mycroft Holmes. He's portly enough, he has the manner. And he'd been quite young at the time that this was actually a film being made in 1942, but I think he could still fill the role. And so that started the ball rolling to have other actors. Not that I'm thinking of them all the time when I'm writing the book, but as a game, if you're making the film, who would you put in it? Who would you start? And so one of the main, so I've got young Anthony Newley as Wiggins. Wiggins is the last of the big regulars at this point. They're all either in the army or they've all sunk into the criminal underworld by this time because we're quite advanced in Holmes' career. Holmes and Watson in their 50s. Another way that this is influenced by the actors, because of course, if you're writing about doing Sherlock Holmes set in 1942, he can't have had the same life experiences as a Victorian Sherlock Holmes.
Of course.
The last adventure of Sherlock Holmes by Conan Doyle was just at the beginning of the Great War in 1914. Well, in this timeline, of course, Holmes and Watson are young men. They both serve in the military. Holmes is a spy behind enemy lines during the Great War, and Watson is actually serving in Belgium. And in fact, I took some inspiration from the actors because they both served in the British Army in the Great War, and they weren't just some poncy actors. I got some information out of it. So I made Holmes and Watson in the book the same age as the actors were at the time. And part of what we got was Basil Rathbone's autobiography in their character. The beginning of the autobiography tells a story about he was a captain in a scouting unit, and he was sent on a mission to infiltrate the German trenches to get information, along with his snipers. So they got into this, and were spotted by a German soldier. Plague raised the alarm. Rathbone pulled out his pistol, shot him, but the alarm was still raised. He and the sniper to run across no man's land with German bullets flying all around them. So it was a. So you think, well, this is the kind of background we've got. Nigel Bruce, he was machine gunned in both legs in the war. He was therefore got honourable discharge at the army because of his wounds. He re-enlisted to an officer in a training corps. So these guys were like real men. They were men of action. They were, so in that thing on screen, they're not just like these guys who've never seen real life and real danger. So I brought into it. So my Watson in this novel, like Nigel Bruce, is shot in both legs by machine gun fire. Rathbone was in a scouting unit, but I have Sherlock Holmes. His skills obviously suit him to be a spy undercover by enemy lines, which late in the book he has a story he's hidden through his whole life about that. Covers. Also, the second reading makes some play with the fact that Holmes is actually older than Watson. Watching those films, you kind of assume that Nigel Bruce, because he's got some grey in his hair and he's a bit portly, he's older of the two. In fact, he was 3 years younger than Basil Rathbone. So I like the notion that Watson's actually the younger of the two. People tend to assume though he's the older one, and that plays to Holmes' vanity a bit. So there's a bit of play with that in the reading I'll do at the end. So and I have Sherlock Holmes attended the same public school that Basil Rathbone went to. So it was a good way to take to blend the actors' lives into the characters, because the characters needed a new timeline, and so you kind of reference to how the basketballs and things like that. So, well, how do you explain? Did that happen in Victorian times, or did that happen at different times? So rather than mess up the notion that all these other stories all happened to the same thing, no, Sherlock Holmes has a new set of adventures that Watson refers to in the book, like the affair of the indigent cavalier and the unstable stable boy and things like that. So as in Conan Doyle, he tosses off names of cases that are never written up. I bunged in a bunch of those as well to give you that kind of atmosphere, and so that Holmes and Watson has their own distinctive set of adventures that are mentioned here and there through the book. And Holmes Hasn't fallen off a waterfall or anything in this one. He does disappear for 2 years in the 1930s. And there's a story behind that that comes out much later in the book. So so the actors, and so I've cast many other parts, and more for fun. And particularly, in the second reading we'll meet Gail Preston, who is a quite a big character. She comes about a third way into the book. She's quite important. She's actually an American radio reporter for the NBC radio network. And she's based on a real character, Helen Hyatt, who broadcast only during the war for NBC. And I thought it'd be an interesting character to have in it, an American lady who's working in London at the time. And I cast Alice Faye as her because if you look at Alice Faye, she was a fabulous actress in Hollywood in the 40s, but she married a Harris. She married Phil Harris, the Bandleading comedian, and gave up her vastly glittering Hollywood career to raise a family. And so she's not as old as she should be, but she's perfect for a woman with a tremendous beauty and character. And Gail is in this, but so that was difficult. So I've cast pretty much everybody who appears in the book, but most of them it's just it got to the point it's just kind of a game to say, well, who could play that part? So put Eric Blower in. But the main characters it matters that it's them. It's supposed to look and sound like them.
Of course, which I think it does. I mean, I think it does. From my perspective, I remember these films being on, bank holidays and kind of rainy afternoons on BBC Two and things like that. And I loved them. I grew up watching them, and it's that kind of proper, boys on adventure stuff, proper kind of swashbuckling action. And I think in my humble opinion, the book comes across exactly like that. You've captured that flavour, the flavour not only of the kind of Universal Pictures element of it, but also of the era, because I think that's important, and I think that's one great thing about Sherlock Holmes novels there are so many of them. There's so much literature. You'll know this exactly, Bob. Any fan really of any kind of literature or any type of Holmes is going to be able to find a voice for it, with the exception, certainly now with obviously with your entry with the Universal Pictures stuff. And I think you wonderfully sum up that. There's a fantastic passage right at the start when Holmes and Watson are flying to Scotland, and they're in the plane, and the navigation officer comes out and he offers beef tea and a cheese roll. And I thought, and then the cheese tastes slightly of engine oil. And I thought, God, that's what a wonderful image. And I could taste it. I could taste it. I was completely on that plane, and I could taste it, and I could feel that. I feel every rivet of this thing rattling as it flies north. And just a really terrific atmosphere. It's something that I certainly enjoyed, as I'm sure a whole load of people are gonna do that too. One thing I was going to ask was, you're a fan. I know that you're a fan. Obviously, fan of the films, fan of the character, fan of that writing, fan of that type of literature, crime literature, mystery novels. Did you find, was there a pressure on you to kind of do this character and do this version of the character, do it justice? Is that something that factored into the writing when you're doing the kind of process? Is it something that you think, I mean, pressure can be good and bad, obviously, but did it cross your mind at all when you're writing it, the kind of gravitas of it, almost?
Well, what I did feel was that given the wealth of Sherlock Holmes pastiches and versions there were, that I wanted to make this that was really good and really worthy of the Conan Doyle original and really worthy of the Rathbone performance and give it life and have a plot that was really worthy challenge for Sherlock Holmes, and that he would come over as being really brilliant. Now, when you're writing a novel and the character has to be brilliant, you've got to be quite clever, come up with clever stuff for him to do. So as you'll know, in the course of the book, he solves a couple of locked room mysteries just by the way, it's a matter of it's a day at the office to doing that kind of thing, so that we get to see how clever Sherlock Holmes is, and then he has to tackle this much bigger, much darker mystery. So but I find it very easy to get into because having read and reread the original stories for doing the Arthur Conan Doyle mysteries, having watched all the Rathbone films again, all that, it just was all there in my head. And luckily, the plot when it came to me came fully formed in one day. I mean, it was my birthday when I had the notion of the Jack the Ripper plot. And so I don't do any work on my birthday, but it was all in my head. So next day I sat down, I banged it all out, detailed outline of the entire book, and emailed my publishers Monday morning. I showed them the printed thing. I gave them that. Here it is. This is it. So yeah, this is great. We'll go for it. So sometimes you can take a long time having a plot, and this was actually the idea of Jack the Ripper, the wartime setting, all of that came together. All the elements of the plot just came together, just like I just stumbled upon a story somebody else had already written. That's not true. I wrote it. It's all me. But it did seem to have a life of its own, which just came on. So it didn't feel hard to write to that extent. I mean, it just seemed to really have a great life, and the characters were so great. I found that Holmes and Watson had just great ways of talking to each other and expressing themselves. That worked out really well. So up to a wonderfully exciting climax, we're going to be on the edge of their seats with. I'm not think, Jonathan, do you want to maybe move on to the question, or do you want to do a last reading and then do the questions?
Why don't we have another reading and then we can move on to the questions?
Right. Okay. So as I explained, there's the character of Gail Preston, who's an NBC reporter, an American lady, who she comes involved in the story because the Crimson Jack, the murderer, had sent her this message for the dog was patting my foot there, to be passed on to Scotland Yard. So Lestrade has come over with this note to consult Holmes what he can make out of it. But then she has figured out what's going on, and she knows he's going to see Scotland, and she barges in and takes over. So so we've got a little bit of, so we get to be, so we've got Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade in Baker Street, but then an intruder. She's actually, we're getting a couple of pages now. We under this bit. So Holmes is asking her about this note that she's passed on. And does that mean anything to you, Miss Preston? Holmes queried. Yes, Lestrade interposed bullishly. It strikes me as mighty fishy, his making you his messenger girl. Gil Preston arched a scornful eyebrow. What do you think? He's my boyfriend? That's not exactly a love letter, you know. She cast a glance around the room. Say, you got any drink around here? It was a very forward request, coming as it did from an uninvited guest, but I retained my good manners. Perhaps I might offer you a sherry. Miss Preston planted herself on the settee and crossed her legs briskly. I was talking about something with hair on its chest. We did bring a bottle of Glenlivet back with us from Scotland, Holmes reminded me. As I poured her a drink, she lit a cigarette and assessed Holmes as though he were at a museum exhibit. So this is the great Sherlock Holmes. It's funny, but you look a lot younger than I expected. Unsurprisingly, Holmes was gratified. I shall take that as a compliment. You're already acquainted with Inspector Lestrade, and this is my good friend and associate, Dr. Watson. I handed the lady her glass of whiskey. And I, Miss Preston, do I meet your expectations? You, Doc? You look just as I would have imagined. Kind of solid and comfy, like an easy chair. I was aware of Holmes concealing a smirk beneath his hand, and could not help feeling ruffled. It irked me people generally assumed Holmes to be the younger of us two, but in fact he was 3 years my senior. This misattribution was due in part to the fact that he had retained the lean, athletic physique of his youth, while I had acquired the somewhat more rounded contours typical of middle age. I also suspected, however, that Holmes had taken to dyeing his hair in order to remove any telltale streaks of grey. It served his vanity well that he was famously a master of disguise. I think that packs in a lot about the relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I enjoyed that. Yeah.
It was fun writing that stuff, yeah.
That's the great thing, obviously, when you're kind of sitting and reading it. You know, I do remember that section that it jumps off the page.
Well, the bit where, because Gail doesn't have any, they're still like Victorian gentlemen. So, I mean, that's okay. It's 1942. They're a bit old-fashioned, a bit stiff. Yeah. But she just comes in like a hand grenade, you know.
Absolutely.
For just as Holmes and Sherlock, Watson comments, I saw my friend wince at the uninvited use of his first name. And she addresses Watson as Doc throughout the entire book. So she just has a character you'd never get in a Victorian Sherlock Holmes novel. But I think that's wonderfully well in this one. And it gives a bit of extra zing to the whole story.
And you know, I read it, and then when you said it again there, I winced. You know, it has has that like, ooh, you know, you're
Oh,
kind of
Sherlock.
breaking that
Holmes.
very delicate social etiquette.
So shall we proceed to some questions I
Yes,
can see that are
absolutely,
lining up?
absolutely. We've got them. We've got them. Yeah, absolutely. It's, thank you very much for the questions. Keep sending them in, folks. If you've got one, we'll kick off with Anne-Marie's question. Will Holmes be moving even further forward into the future if there is a sequel?
Yes, I'm writing the sequel now. It's called The Devil's Blaze. I think a lot of the questions probably all answer that probably. I think as I've played up. Yeah, because the first plot I had when I was first pitching the idea of the 1940s Sherlock Holmes was about people bursting into flames, being killed by spontaneous human combustion. And in course of investigating this, Holmes would encounter Professor Moriarty. This would be their first actual meeting, ever in this timeline of Sherlock Holmes. But then when I got the Ripper plot, that actually the full-fledged plot came. But then after that, once I'd written this, I suddenly saw how the other plot would work out. So the first book is Sherlock Holmes, World War II, Jack the Ripper. The second book is Sherlock Holmes, Spontaneous Human Combustion, Professor Moriarty. So I'm writing the chapter I'm writing. I've been writing. I'm on preparing for this all day. Is where Holmes has a fencing match with Colonel Sebastian Moran. So we have there's a lot of fun to be had with how Moriarty is operating. Will we find him in wartime? But I won't say more about that just now. We're still writing it. That hopefully will be out next year. But yes, it just seems like a good idea. You can't not Moriarty, he appears twice in the Rathbone films. So I'd say with the films, I'm not trying to weave it into the films. The films themselves don't follow a sort of time. They don't refer to each other. They're all just individual stories. So I thought what I'll do, whereas what I'm writing forms a certain continuity with the books themselves, but doesn't try to fit in with what happens in the films as well. It takes elements from them and a few characters and references to them, which help make that connection. But yes, there is more. There's at least one more. So we'll see after that how it all goes. And another question, is that question the same thing in other words? Or
Just differently worded. No, far from it. Jem's asking, which is your favourite Rathbone film?
Well, it's almost a cheap answer because the Scarlet Claw, which is in a village run by swamps in Canada, and there's a glowing spectral figure who's going around slashing people to death with a claw. So it's kind of Hound of the Baskervilles-esque, and so it's got that nice kind of supernatural frisons to it, and lots of creepiness, and so it's one of those great rainy night, turn the lights off, get your mug of hot chocolate and your hobnobs out and watch it like a nice creepy film. Plus, it's got Sherlock Holmes in it. So that's a favourite, I would say. If I had to say which one we'd like to watch tonight, I'd pick that one out. And, but the 12 of them, they're all really good. Sherlock Holmes in Washington's a bit weak. But other than that, they're all brilliant and all really entertaining. So that's my pick, the Scarlet Claw. And of course, I've written the Scarlet Phantom is a South African Doyle novel, so that's kind of a little allusion to the Scarlet Claw.
Elizabeth has asked if this book takes off, which it will, obviously. Will there be any further adventures of Sherlock Holmes? So we've already touched on that. Have you got anything beyond? You've got anything beyond beyond the next one?
At this point, no. But after this, I've got to write my third Richard Hannay novel. My much delayed third Richard. I'm only under contract to write that, and I've done the two Sherlock Holmes before. So that, and then so we'll see. If in the meantime, another great plot comes, which is what I find is almost by magic sometimes. I need to come to plot. An idea comes and it unfolds really in detail, and I get excited about it and write the story. So I'm really enjoyed writing Study in Crimson. I'm really enjoying writing this one, The Devil's Blaze. The chance to write extended scenes between Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, give him far more airtime that he gets in Conan Doyle, is just tremendous to have the two of them verbally sparring with each other, and things more dangerous than verbally sparring as well. So I don't know. I'd be very happy if ideas kept coming for more, but I've got other stuff to do in the meantime. But you got this one, and the two next Holmes should be out next year. So that's two in the meantime, which people should enjoy. I hope. Anyway, fantastic. Next question.
Lucy is asking. Lucy, I should firstly say that Lucy loves your John Buchan tributes. Are there any other classic characters that you have your eye on?
No, no. I have a couple of real life characters. I won't say too much. One's a medieval character, and one's a 20th century character, and I have ideas for novels about them. But I don't want to give that away because somebody might steal it. But the few people in my inner circle who have heard these things have been pretty excited about it. You've got your own ideas, Jonathan. I'm not talking about, but we'll see. But yeah, so yeah, not literary figures, but real life, kind of like when I did the Leonardo book, teenage Leonardo, and the Shakespeare, and Conan Doyle was up there follow-up to those two, the original Arthur Conan Doyle book. There's going to be a third in that series, but then the publisher said, we'll make this one into a series in its own right. So we've done 3 books of those at this point. But yeah, a couple of real people who will find themselves caught up in mystery and adventure and danger. But I can't say any more than that. But I may end up writing more Holmes before that. We'll see.
Wonderful. Jamie is asking Conan Doyle or John Buchan?
Oh no, you can't.
Straight to the point there.
You can't rival it. No. No, they're both quite brilliant.
Get off the face.
Tons of them both, yeah. But so no. I mean, I've actually, because I've read pretty much all the Buchan, and I've been catching up on Conan Doyle. Now reading Conan Doyle's Brigadier Gerard stories. They're absolutely brilliant. I'm ashamed of myself taking so long to get into reading them. And I've read some of his historical novels as well now. They're great. So I'm expanding my Conan Doyle beyond, Holmes, Challenger, and the Lost World stuff. And I think you get more and more respect. You read further out, you think, gosh, he's done all this. The John Buchan, I just, after reading all these thrillers, went to his historical novels, and they're fantastic as well. So they're both inspired by Sir Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson. They both get inspiration from that. So they're part of the same thing. So I'm not going to declare a winner. It's going to be like Rocky and Apollo Creed knocking each other to the canvas and cut off before either one gets up. So.
That's fine. We'll just ask the question at the next one. What to do. And then we'll have to get a winner for following the Rocky timeline. Moving on, John and Judy, they asked, do you portray Lestrade as incompetent or as a worthy partner, and does Mycroft feature?
Oh. Yes, there must be a miss. Well, yeah, we've been talking to the Mycroft feature played by Robert Morley. There's 2 chapters of Mycroft in it. So he's because he is in the Conan Doyle, he is the government. So his role in wartime Britain is very important as he takes all the information and intelligence and suggests courses of action to the government. So his job is to get his brother in to solve these killings because it's causing a lot of unrest in the city. And Lestrade, Lestrade doesn't run off and arrest the wrong person and stuff like that. He's not a buffoon. He's just a plodding, hard-working policeman. And in this book, the nice thing with the book, this is because Holmes' career is quite far along, that he and Lestrade are quite comfortable with each other. Lestrade is not embarrassed about asking for help. He doesn't refer to Holmes as an amateur. They've worked together for years now, and there's a respect between them. And so Lestrade has certain insights that he's a good, steady copper. And I think a really fun character, because whereas Holmes and Watson talk like they're in Conan Doyle, they're guys who read the public school, they're educated blokes who talk in that way. Whereas Lestrade is just even quite of his French name, he's just a common everyday bloke. He talks like a normal person. And his own idioms and that are actually very, very colourful as well. So yeah, I think Lestrade gets a lot to do in the book. He appears quite a lot in the book. And to good effect, I think he comes off really well in it. I think it's a good man of real integrity and a hard-working policeman.
Fantastic. Toby asked if Holmes will be taken into the Cold War.
I'm not sure I'll live long enough to do that. I have to write nothing else and just keep writing them. Somebody else can do that. Somebody else can invent a 1950s Sherlock Holmes.
Jamie?
So yeah, Jamie, you could do that. But we've already got modern day. We've got a couple of contemporary TV shows, which I feel with that, 1950s. Yeah, I mean, it's not to criticize them, but you're so far away from the origins of Sherlock Holmes with these things that it's not really the same character. You can't. I think in 1942, Sherlock Holmes and Watson can be as they are in Victorian times, And a lot of the strength of that is that Rathbone and Bruce are so good. They've established themselves already and their relationship in the first two Victorian set movies. When they suddenly step out into wartime London, it just feels all right. You know, it's okay for them to be like that. The Baker Street still got a scimitar hanging on the wall and stuff like that, but it's got a radio and a telephone and stuff like that. Whereas I think the further you move away, I think you can't, I think, keep that connection. So no, I'm not writing anything for Sherlock Holmes. I mean, look, I can write a couple more 1940s ones. That would be enough of it. Get me to the end of the war would be my big ambition. Between Richard Hannay and Sherlock Holmes, I hope to make it to the end of the war and celebrate VE Day.
Anne asks, what is about Sherlock Holmes and the Conan Doyle's creation as a whole that readers and writers continue to be fascinated with? Good question.
Big question for me to answer. Okay. Well,
you're the author, Bob. That's the. It's not all Zoom launches and.
Well, I mean, I think I think Sherlock Holmes. What can we say? He there's something. Conan Doyle is just such a great writer. I mean, he gives Holmes this brilliant intellect and this great energy and courage and sense of justice, which is very important in the book. That Holmes is a real believer in justice. In Conan Doyle's stories, sometimes he'll let the criminal go because that's the right thing to do. You know, he's not interested in just holding up the law. So that, but he has a strength of character that allows him to do that. That he's not a servant of the law. He's a servant of justice. That he will do the thing that's just. And I think that's part of the appeal. He's an independent figure. He's not like DCI Cruikshank or something. He's going off to solve a murder or something. He's his own man and will do what he thinks is right. And only as I'm talking about it, that's very much part of the appeal. He's a consulting detective, and nobody can order him about. The police can't tell him what to do. The government can't tell him what to do. He'll figure out what to do and do the right thing. And I think that's a lot of the appeal of it. That it's not a maverick thing. It's just answering to a higher justice, which is a theme that comes out in the novel. It's quite an important part of the novel. The novel's in 3 parts, and the last part is called Justice. So I think that he's like a knight of justice, an independent, traveling knight errant of justice, going around, righting wrongs. They're like Batman. So that's the best answer I can give at this point.
I think that's a fairly good answer. A B plus.
Oh, thanks very much.
No,
that means a lot to me.
I'm only kidding. Jem is asking, have you made Dr. Watson faithful to the books or the Nigel Bruce version?
Well, that's a good question. See, because in the books, I think there's a nice bit of where occasionally Watson gets to puncture Holmes' pride, he gets to pull a gag, and Holmes is sometimes his high opinion of himself is often brought low by other people, as is in this book a couple of times. so yes, I think they've got a lively thing which sometimes not everybody manages to capture in a book or a film. I think as the readings I've given you there, I think show they've got that kind of sparky relationship. Now in the films by Nigel Bruce, well, sometimes people complain Nigel Bruce becomes a figure of fun. Well, these were B pictures. They were actually, when they were shown in Britain, it was a double bill with an Abbott Costello comedy. So Watson is sometimes used for a bit of comic effect for being a complete duffer. I do joke about that as well. So my Watson's not like that. He's never made a figure of fun. But of course, he has to continue to be baffled by Holmes' brilliance. He has to be exasperated by Holmes. So those elements are still there. And I think the point of Nigel Bruce is, until Nigel Bruce, Watson wasn't really a character anybody cared about. There'd been Sherlock Holmes films made before this, and Watson wasn't even in them. Because in the stories, Watson is basically the storyteller. He's the window that goes to the Sherlock Holmes story. You can tell a Sherlock Holmes story without him. Once you got Nigel Bruce and Basil Rathbone together, they're just a great team. They just work. They just play really well off together. And they were actually friends, just part of the British community in Hollywood, and so knew each other before they made these films. So and they had a very warm relationship through many years. Many years later, Holmes, Watson, Rathbone tried to revive Holmes on stage, and he wanted to have Nigel Bruce in it with him, but Bruce's health was failing Rathbone to do it. So I think Nigel Bruce deserves a lot of credit for making Watson a character that we remember, and that Holmes is not complete without him. And same with Dennis Hoy's Lestrade. I mean, Lestrade isn't much of a character in the Conan Doyle stories. I think Dennis Hoy's Lestrade in the films is a really full, rounded character. We know what he looks like and sounds like, and It's like, and I've tried to represent that in the book. It's been very much a Dennis Hoy style in the book. So yeah, so that's so yeah. My Watson is probably a little bit trimmer than Nigel Bruce. Not a little bit less portly, a little bit more sort of action oriented. Yeah, so it's Bruce, but edited, photoshopped a little bit. Maybe.
How 21st century. Wonderful, that's what we like. And Kirsty asks, how important do you feel it is to have humour in your novels, even when the topic, as here, is ostensibly quite grim?
Yeah, well, I just everything I write has got a bit of humour. Both the Annie books, the adult books, the children's books also got humour in them to give the kids everything, and so. But I find that just because life is like that. I mean, I laugh a lot. Funny things happen to you, God knows. And so, even in the midst
of
of
installment of these live events, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so even with all of the grim, particularly with the grim murders that are in this, because I'm not really a big fan of serial killers and brutally murdering women. It's not a topic that appeals to me very much. And so I have to describe these things, obviously, but not any more than is necessary for the story. And the humorous elements really come from the characters. The interplay between Holmes and Watson is sometimes quite funny, as is evidence there. And also Watson gets teamed up with Gail, an American character in it, to go and interview people. And she does things that he's not used to. He's used to kind of being with Holmes, and it's all very forward, and whereas she just pulls off tricks and pretenses to fool people and things, and he's just aghast at all this, and to deal with this woman who's not like anybody he's met before. So, so there's a lot of humour in that. But also, there are moments of real seriousness, dwelling on Watson's widowed, of course, as in Conan Doyle. Mrs. Watson has died some years before this. And in this version, Watson stays in the marital home until it's hit by a German bomb. Then he moves back into Baker Street. So we do have a bit where Watson is reflecting on his loss. It's quite an important part of the character. It's not made much of in Conan Doyle, because that's basically, based on that. But here, it's an important element of Watson's character, that he's widowed and thinks he'll never get over the grief that he feels about that. So that's the other side of it. You can have funny bits, but you've got that stuff where you're dealing with very serious personal matters, which Carl through the book.
Wonderful.
Time's getting on. I don't know, we keep asking questions. I'm fine. I'm okay with it. But if you've got something
does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask? We've come to the
ones in the chat there.
Those are the ones in the
that's fine.
The chat.
Okay, we're going to wrap up.
It's
what I'm going to say, people here, there's John and Judy there, I haven't seen for years. Mark Carawan, haven't seen for years either, yeah. So we'll email and arrange to do a Zoom or a Skype or something and have a good catch-up chat with all the folk we haven't seen for a long time. Because it's lovely you turned up for this. We sent you the invitation and you turned up. I mean, can't spend time chatting with you now because we've got all this book stuff to do. But we'll definitely email and then set up a Skype or a Zoom in the near future and have drinks and over this and catch up with what we're all doing. That'd be great. So I'll leave it at that, just to say that that's a bonus for us that people have shown up and not seen for a long time. And got a chance. Well, we can't go and see anybody anyway under the certain restrictions, so we can all get together on have a Zoom or Skype chit chat with drinks and snacks and do that very soon. I'll get onto that very, very quickly, very soon. So if you perhaps John, to wrap up and we can picture.
Yes, absolutely. The last thing I was going to say, obviously, folks, you can order your copy of The Fantastic Study in Crimson at the Berlin website, and it's available in all good bookshops and probably some of the bad ones as well, where you'll probably find it. Well, my books only appear in the bad ones, so you're in fine company. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Bob. Congratulations again. Double congratulations, obviously, on publication day and the kind of New Deal in America. Get it, read it. I've read it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to read it again.
Yes.
I'm going to get you to sign it too. Which
you have to come here in person to do that.
Exactly, when we will meet again, as they say. But thank you, everybody, for showing up and enjoy the book. And
we'll get in touch with you again and do this without talking on book all the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, you want to come and shut us off here?
Right. This is
John Judy up there.
Hello.
Mark and Rosemary are there.
Hiya.
all looking well, I must say.
You guys look fantastic. Super. However, I am exiting